Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unity's Asset Store Showcase. We're live on Unity Tech. I'm Hassan, your usual host, and I'm here with an amazing guest, Freya Holmer. Hello, Freya. How's it going?
Hello. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm very good. Welcome. I think this is your first time on our stream.
Is it? I think
Maybe?
it is.
Yeah. You joined us for Unite. We had an amazing session with Renaud from
true.
More Mountains, but this is the first time live on the on Unity's Twitch. You're also live on your own Twitch, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I was hoping I would get more views. I've been watching the numbers to see if I would win, but it looks like Unity's winning so far. But
it's not a competition. Listen, everyone, go follow Freya. Go. So what is the Twitch handle for anybody?
Twitch.tv/AceGikmo, which is every second letter from A to O. So ACEGIKMO.
That's great.
If you want to follow my stream, you get a shittier experience than the one on Unity stream. So if you want a shitty backroom experience where you don't see Hassan or anything, then feel free to join my stream.
But you will be doing a post show, am I right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking maybe you can raid me or something like.
Oh
at
yeah.
The end, and then
Let's do that.
Viewers my way.
Let's
in case people want to stick around, ask irrelevant questions or whatever.
It'll be fun. I'll be joining. I'll be tuning in myself. So there's, Freya is known for a lot of amazing contributions to game development. Most recently, Shapes. And for those of you who don't already know, Shapes is a real-time vector graphics library with high-quality line drawing in Unity. And that's basically what we're going to be talking about today for the most part, but we also want to hear about your journey up until this point, how you got to Shapes. But maybe we can just put up the trailer for Shapes on the side and speak to it, right? So just, for anybody who hasn't seen it, we can get a visual of what it actually looks like in action. So let's cut to that. There we go.
It's completely silent though.
So it's silent, so we're gonna have to fill the space, the empty space.
Yeah.
Hold on, it's not playing yet, so we need to get it playing.
Should I show it on my screen? Okay.
Yeah, why not? Show it on both streams. There we go. It's about to. There we go. Okay. Yeah. So essentially, what we're looking at here, you've got these are all built in Unity in real time, right?
Yes, they are all real time in Unity.
Okay, amazing. And some of them are written with code. This is a spawn point that you've made. This one looks a bit 3D actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like some of them, I do have some 3D shapes and shapes as well, but it's primarily for 2D graphics.
Okay.
But I mean, you can place 2D graphics in 3D, right?
Yeah.
Right. So most of the shapes are 2D, but I do have some 3D graphics as well. Like anytime you want something with volume, like spheres or tori or cones, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so from that trailer, we could see you did some like math visualizations. There's some HUD, some UI. There was like a FPS HUD or something. What other kind of things can you make with Shapes, or do you recommend people make with Shapes?
I mean, it's kind of up to you, really. It's sort of like asking, what can you do with text? Like there are many things you can do with text, right?
That's right.
So I think the main thing about Shapes, I would say, is that anything you would do in things like processing or like HTML5 canvas, because that allows you to do these like very crisp graphics, right?
Okay.
And then what do you use them for? That could be anything from like maybe some prompts, like a button prompt that's like flashing like around a button you can press in a game. Maybe you want to visualize spawn points in some way. They're just like anything that involves vector graphics.
Okay.
And so maybe you want to draw trajectories. Maybe you want to draw some arrows for like a game like XCOM, and maybe you want to draw a path that you're going to walk. So there's like, anything with vector graphics really is what it's designed for, at least.
Amazing. And we're going to get to, what inspired you to like start building this. But before that, I'd like to just get a general history of your, I guess, career or your own trajectory with Unity and on the asset store, and before that, like what you've worked on outside of the asset store as well.
Oh God, where do I start?
Yeah, so it's at the beginning. Where were you born, Freya?
Okay, I don't even know where to start because I've been doing this since like I've been doing a lot of like modding as a kid. Like that's
Yeah.
kind of how I started, like in the modding scene, and well, in every game I played pretty much. So I think I started getting into it more seriously around the time of the release of Gary's Mod and
Oh,
Team Fortress 2. So a
nice.
lot of my modding kind of started there. I did
Cool.
a few things in like games before, like Elder Scrolls 3, Morrowind. I did some
Okay.
modding stuff there. And then from there, it kind of grew, and I think with Team Fortress 2, they had a very, very good like level design community. And so that's where I really like realized that, oh, this is actually a job. Like you can actually be a level
Interesting.
designer. And so then like level designer slash level artist was kind of the thing that I wanted to be. Specifically, I wanted to work as a level designer at Valve because I was a
Yeah.
huge fan of Valve and Team Fortress and Portal and Half-Life, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my start in like taking this more seriously. And then I think oh God, when did I forget when. It must have been in 2010-ish. That's when I kind of discovered the Unreal Engine, as well as Unity shortly after.
Yeah.
So I was using both of them at the time, like UDK it was called. I think that was the Unreal Engine 3 editor. And then I also discovered Unity. I think I started using Unity right before the release of Unity 3, I
Okay.
think. I forget.
Nice. So you've been around
I've been around,
for
yeah.
Unity journey. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think as soon as I started using Unity, that was when I was like, see, you know, when I was using UDK, the only way to make like functionality was like through Unreal Script, which I think was a fork of JavaScript. I forget. It was weird, very underdocumented and hard to use. Otherwise, you only had the like level scripting stuff.
Yeah.
And it was kind of hard to make the types of games that I wanted to make. Like if you just wanted to implement some custom functionality, that was just hard. But then I think that the thing that Unity really changed for me was that that was easy. Like all of a sudden, it was just like, oh,
Right.
create a script, attach it, and then write the things you wanted to do. And it felt very much like for the first time, I could start making games from scratch.
Okay.
You know, in UDK, you kind of spawned with like some Unreal Tournament dude with a space church aesthetic with a weapon. Like
Right.
that was kind of the how UDK always started, and then you had to work backwards from that to make a different game.
Gotcha.
Whereas in Unity, it was like you have an empty scene with a camera, and it was like,
What
oh,
do you want to make? Yeah.
neat, yeah.
And you kind
And
of
that
wanted
opened
to
up a
level up.
lot of. Sorry, continue.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say you kind of wanted to level up from, building those mods and level design, like just being restricted by the level design in Team Fortress 2, and you're like, did you have a specific idea in mind that you're like, okay, I want to make because you mentioned these kinds of games. What inspired you to start making your own thing from scratch rather than just continue making those mods?
I'm not sure. I think it was just that it was fun. Don't think I had like a dream game in mind that I was like, I really want to do this. I think
Okay.
even after I started like doing stuff in Unity, I still wanted to work as a level designer.
Yeah.
So around that time, I was still super focused on like trying to make very like good levels for Team Fortress 2. I worked a lot with visuals. I wanted to be a level artist for a long time.
Very nice.
And so yeah, so I was sort of doing both in parallel. But then after a while, you know, C# is very nice, and I kind of I just realized that I could do so much with it, and it was just so fun to play with. And it was kind of a return to my. I used Game Maker when I was a kid, Game Maker 6, I think, and then I felt like, oh, I can start making games again, rather than just mods, and that was just a super fun experience.
And where were you at when you started using Unity and like Unreal after you were doing the level design? Were you like in school at the time? Were you working, or were you? Yeah,
That was
where were you?
right after high school.
Okay.
I think that's when I started using Unity. Yeah, modding and stuff was way earlier than that. But yeah, so around there.
Nice.
And then I went to a like 2-year short like vocational education on game design at a place called Future Games. So that was the class of 2010, I think. Yeah.
Oh, did that program exist for a while? Because I feel like a lot of game design programs are relatively young, right? So
Yeah. It was one of the earlier ones out there. Like now there are like game development courses at universities and whatnot, but back then there wasn't.
Yeah.
So that was kind of one of the few places that had that. But it was very nice in the way that I think I was the second class. There had only been one before.
Okay, nice.
And so I think the nice thing about that one is that there's actually like all the teachers were in the industry. And so you wouldn't get
Oh, that's
like
great.
some academic that has no idea about the industry and then they give you some like math questions that are completely unrelated. And then you have to
Gotcha.
write a paper before even touching a,
For actually
program like
building.
Unity or Unreal, right?
So the people who were teaching were doing, and that's extremely important.
Yeah. Of course, the downside of that is that you get teachers that might not be very good teachers, but at least they know their stuff. So, like, if you have excited students, then at least if they ask the right question, they can extract the
answers.
information from the teachers.
Okay, gotcha. And I'm guessing you were an excited student.
I was, yes.
Great.
I was mostly, I mean, I was super interested in level design and level art.
Yeah.
Game design, I was never very interested in. A lot of game design to me felt like, I don't know, it felt like, I feel like a lot of game design is just based on vibes, but people pretend it's this very established science and make up terms for every single mechanic ever
Okay.
and write these huge
That's a-
books about every mechanic
That's a hot
without
take.
ever having like ran studies on them. It's just kind of
Right.
vibes. That's what it
okay.
feels like to me, at least.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, so my philosophy was always like, I never cared too much about game design that way. I mostly wanted to, I had a very game jam approach. I always prototyped and created like small games, testing them, seeing if it was fun, and then just kind of going from there.
And did you learn to code in C# and all that in the program you were in, or did you do it in your own time? Like, were you learning C# and shader code?
I'd done some coding before, but that was the first time I touched C#, I think. Yeah.
Okay. And so then what did you build? Like, what were you building at first? What were Freya's first creations?
What were they? A lot of them were experiments. Because, as soon as you learn coding, you have a lot of like things that might seem fun to try. Like, how would I like generate a road along a 3D like spline? That was like one of the first things I did was to 3D generate a spline road along a Bezier curve.
Okay, nice. That's fun.
We went full circles. I'm like knee deep in Bezier curves now. But that was kind of one of my first few projects. I played around with a lot of things like that. I also did, what else did I do? I started working on a little prototype game called Flowstorm back then, which is a game that I've rewritten, I think 3 or 4 times, but it's never been released. And
your YouTube,
I'm still working on it.
Nice. And there are clips of it on your YouTube, right?
Oh yeah, some very old clips. Yeah.
Yes. So funny.
Yeah, it's it's basically Trackmania, but in 2D, where you slide on walls with a rocket.
I mean, that sounds awesome. I mean, sign me up. And we're gonna drop a link to Freya's YouTube in the chat, so you can go check that stuff out. And there's other stuff on your YouTube too. It's not just Flowstorm. There's some amazing like tutorials, math videos. So using shapes actually, but we'll get to that.
I use shapes for my Bezier curve video at least.
Okay, cool. Okay, and so then at a certain point, you built one of the most popular asset store assets. You went from making games to actually making assets for the asset store for Unity, and that was ShaderForge, correct?
Yep.
Okay. So what brought you to that? What brought you to ShaderForge? From making these little Bezier curve street prototypes?
Well, like I mentioned before, I'd always been interested in visuals. I love doing level art. That was my favorite part of, I want to say my favorite part of level design, but when you're doing level design as a hobbyist, like making levels for Team Fortress 2, you're not just a level designer, you're also a like level artist. You're making environments and you're making them pretty and believable and like interesting to look at visually. You're also doing lighting. And so usually that's called mapping. Like it's not just level design. And then I kind of realized that my favorite part was the art process of level design or of mapping. And when I moved to Unity, it kind of became a like sharp dive into just working on code and mechanics. And then I started missing like doing art. I was kind
Okay.
of like Unreal has always been, it still is a very good engine when you're doing art.
Right.
Um, but I sort of missed that in Unity because in Unreal you had this material editor, which in reality is a shader editor, and it was node based, so it was visual, so I could actually see every step along the way. You know, what does the dot product between the lighting vector and the normal vector do? I
Yes.
can see
Yes.
that, and that was so valuable to me. And then when I switched to Unity, I was like, where's my shader editor? Because there was none at the time.
Right.
And so I kind of started looking into like how do I write shaders with code, because I'd never done that. I'd only used the node-based one. So I took several weeks to just like dive super deep into how to write shaders and how to write plugins for Unity.
Okay.
And that was like, it was in 2014, so neither shaders nor editor scripting was like well documented at
Yeah.
all. So please don't look at the source code of ShaderForge and use it as some sort of reference for how to write good code, because it is absolutely garbage. Do
But
not
it
use that
works.
for anything. And don't read any forum posts from me before 2020, actually.
Hey, that's fairly recent.
Um,
Just pre-COVID, nothing. Freya does not
yeah,
exist
yeah.
pre-COVID.
It was just the code base was garbage, but
Yeah.
it did work. It actually ended up I ended up making a shader editor that like kind of accidentally became the industry standard,
Absolutely.
which was
Yeah.
unexpected and weird and overwhelming to some extent. But it was also super exciting. I was like, it was so exciting to like my goal was like I want shaders to be easier to make in Unity. And I knew that a lot of other artists wanted access to this. And then I was like, oh, the asset store, that seems like a good avenue to both get this out to people and potentially make money to start my own studio.
So when you first
work
made
on
it,
indie games.
yeah, okay. And when you first made it, were you thinking, oh, I'm gonna like eventually monetize this, or were you building it and then after it was done, you're like, wait a minute, I could monetize this on the asset store? I'm just curious what the
I forget the exact order there. I think usually like every asset that I make starts with a use case for me. Like I want to make shaders in Unity and I don't like doing it by hand because like it's a bit of a nightmare. It's like, oh, if I just want to add a normal map to an object, that's like, oh god, then I need to set up the vertex shader, I need to pass the normal, I need to pass the tangent from the vertex shader to the fragment shader, I need to construct tangent space, the tangent space matrix so that I can transform from tangent space to world space, and then I can use my normal map direction, and like it's a whole process, and that process kind of hinders experimentation.
Yes.
I loved how in the material editor, when it was node based, all of that was done for me.
Right.
It was just like, I want to do this, and then I connect that node, and then it works. That workflow was really, really valuable to me, like as someone who couldn't code shaders at the time. And so I really wanted to give that to other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the monetization aspect kind of came later, I think, when I kind of realized that there are other people that need it. I really want to work on indie games at this point, and so it was just a good source for that. And it ended up going really well. It pulled in like 2 salaries,
Oh, nice.
and so I started. Yeah, I then started a company.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah, you essentially turned something very technical, but yet artistic and visual into an actual artist tool, as it should be. You know, like this is something that you're gonna want artists to experiment with to get their perspectives on, right? If it's not accessible, you're not gonna get an artist's perspective on this. You're only gonna get somebody who considers themselves strictly programmers or strictly tech art people. But you kind of allowed more people to share their perspectives. I think with this tool, you enabled people, which I think is amazing. And what year did it come out originally?
I think I forget. I talked about it at Unite 2014.
Okay,
So I'm
there you go.
probably around there.
And it's still in use today, right? Like we still have developers who are using ShaderForge as their main
Unfortunately, yes.
shader editor. Hey, listen, they're using it for a reason because it works great. And we were talking to Thomas Sala the other day, and he's using ShaderForge on his latest game, Bulwark. Used it on the Falconeer. So yeah, it's still strong and alive. And
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
yeah.
it's yeah. I eventually let go of it because I didn't have time to work on it, and there was I feel like Shade of Forge was still pulling in money for a long time.
Yeah.
But then I felt like it was kind of irresponsible to not have time to update it and maintain it and still selling it. I felt really uncomfortable doing that. So I ended up open sourcing it after a while.
Okay.
And then since then, I've just not really touched it and not done any support work because I was burnt out at the time, and so I just couldn't do it. But yeah, people still use it.
Which is great. And since then, you said you wanted to start developing indie games. Did you go and pursue that?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
It's a good leading question. You know the answer.
But the
Started a
audience
company
doesn't.
called Neat Corp, or Neat Corporation.
Yeah.
It was we started out wanting to work on Flowstorm, the little rocket ship game that I talked about.
Yeah, that's right.
That was going to be the initial goal, and that's when I did the second rewrite of the game. No, the third, maybe second, I forget. So I rewrote the game from scratch, started doing that. We launched
Yeah.
a Kickstarter that failed, because Kickstarter is very hard. That was around the time when Kickstarter was popular among game
Right.
devs.
And everything
We were
was
a
just
little bit
exploding.
late, though, I think.
Okay.
But yeah, Kickstarter didn't go super well, and then we kind of started freelancing, and it kind of like things didn't really go super well. But then when Shade of Forge started making money, we were like, okay, now we can start working on Flowstorm again. Started working on it, and then we went to GDC. I forget which GDC, 2015, 2016, somewhere there. And we met up with Valve, and they were just about to they were going to release their VR headset pretty soon. They were still in the early stages of the Vive. And so we met up with them, and we knew that they were sort of showcasing their VR headset in the background, but we were not one of the cool people that could get access to testing it out. But eventually we went to, I think it was actually Unity's GDC party. We just went to a random, when I say we, it's me and my classmate, Jenny, because we were the ones who started the company.
Oh, nice.
And so we just went to a random table at the Unity party at GDC, just to okay, we should network. Let's awkwardly walk up to people. And then we did, and it just so happened to be people from Valve. It was Chet Felzak, and I forget who the other person was. Sorry if you're listening, other person. I forget who it was, but it was two people from Valve, and we just struck up a conversation, and then they were like, yeah, we can send you a dev kit. That's cool. And we were like, holy shit. We're getting this super early access to VR technology. That's
so cool.
Yeah. So that was really cool. And so that was exciting. And then when we came home, we eventually got the dev kit. We were kind of enamored by the whole technology. It was super exciting to try this out, because we'd never done this before. VR was still very much in its infancy, but the Vive was kind of the first time you got this room scale experience. You were standing up holding controllers, and it was very much a full body experience rather than just you're sitting down with a VR headset and you don't have any controllers. But as soon as you have a controller in your hand that you can also see in VR, that connection is really, really cool.
Right. It kind of bridges that gap between the virtual world and the real world.
It does. And it was actually immersive for the first time. It wasn't like you were wearing the shitty, I don't know, the shitty early Oculus, sitting on a roller coaster feeling nauseous. Now it was actually you actually do get a really good presence. So that was super fun, experimenting with that, finding with the game design language of VR, which is very different. So that was super exciting. So then after that point, we started prototyping, and eventually we made a game, or we made a demo for a game called Budget Cuts. So we released a demo of this. Just on Steam for free. It was just it was one level, and it was kind of a stealth VR. It was a VR stealth game, effectively.
We're getting some love for budget cuts in the chat right now. So
Good.
yes.
And so that was super fun, and the game got a ridiculously positive reception. Like usually when I release something or show something to someone, they're like, "Oh, it's cool, but it's not really a game for me," I think, or like it's kind of mellow like that.
Yeah.
But when with budget cuts, literally everyone that tested it were like, "Holy shit,
Nice.
this is amazing."
It's like an
And, like,
overwhelming reaction.
yeah, and like sure, we didn't really know if like we didn't really know if it was just because of the VR technology or if it was actually our game. But that
interesting.
was super fun, and we had like a huge amount of momentum like in the VR community as well. It was kind of like this wild, like budget cuts became like the most anticipated game within the VR developer community.
Wow.
And then we were like, okay, we started scaling up. We started hiring a few more people. And the game was finished after 2 years, I think. I think it was
Okay.
released in 2018. I forget. I don't remember all the things. And then once it was released, it was a little bit mixed reception because it was kind of buggy.
I see. Okay.
And but yes, I think that we had more hype during the demo than we
phase.
did for the actual release. But
I see.
those things happen, I guess.
Yeah.
But it was super fun. I learned a lot. And that was kind of exciting. And that it still did well. And so that was kind of our flagship title as a company. So then eventually we moved on to make Budget Cuts 2.
Nice.
And yeah, and Neat Corp is still alive and kicking today. Although I don't work there anymore because I left.
Okay. I see.
Yeah.
I see. And since then, what have you been working on?
Sorry, what?
Since like after leaving Neat Corp, you moved on to start teaching, right? Teaching, but then also
Yes.
eventually you started working on a new asset. And so, yeah, what was that transition like?
So I think I've been doing teaching kind of on and off at Future Games, the same school that I went to. I think the thing I really liked about teaching was that I always got a really positive reception.
Okay,
when I
good.
did it. It was just very validating. People always really liked whenever I presented something.
Nice.
And so it seemed like I had a good approach to teaching. And then since then, I kind of just continue doing it, just talking about math, shaders, tool development, whatever I'd done things with before. And so we kind of just evolved into doing live streams where I just broadcasted my lectures.
Okay.
When I talked to the school, I was like, okay, I want to broadcast my lectures publicly. Can I do that? And eventually we found a deal that worked out well.
Great.
And so I started doing that, and it's gone really well. It's really nice to be able to like share knowledge in a way that's useful for others, especially when it comes to things that are kind of obscure, like shader programming is usually kind of complicated.
Absolutely.
And then the same thing goes for like tool development. I also like did tutorials on that. And so yeah, and then once I left Neat Corp, it was because I feel like our goals diverged a little bit.
Okay.
Like I wanted to work on more personal projects.
Yes.
And as soon as a company grows and they start getting more people and you want to have a bit of a democratized workplace where everyone has opinions about everything, if that democracy goes in a direction that you don't want to go, then
You feel a bit left behind or left out.
well, I feel a little bit not left behind. Like I'm fine with people making decisions. It's just
Right.
that I don't want to be the person who's like, well, can I swear?
You can.
Okay. I don't want to be the person that's like, well, fuck you. I want to do this, and I'm just
Yeah.
going to override all of your opinions because I'm
Right.
the co-founder. Like, I'm not that kind of person. I'm
Yeah.
weaker than that, and I'm more compassionate. So,
Yeah. Okay. I understand.
And so I just realized that, well, I mean, I should just work on my own things because I have a lot of like my own little game projects and tools that I like working on. And so I feel like our goals were just not super aligned. And so I eventually left to do that.
Okay.
And that also included doing streaming, which I
Yes.
started doing around that time, like streaming development on Twitch.
And
which is-
again, for
which is
anybody
also-
who's not aware, you're streaming from your channel right now, and I want to drop another link to it in the chat, so you can, to your Twitch stream. Make
it's a
sure to follow Freya.
secret
Sorry.
stream in the background.
Secret stream. Yes, exactly.
We're very much losing on the view count.
Make sure to follow both.
Sure. My
And
cat's screaming in the background.
that's fine. We accept all pets, cats, dogs, babies. We've had babies on the stream.
Oh,
It's
good.
just another. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, Ashley's bringing
Hello.
toast.
And
He's
what
a very
is
good boy.
what is his name?
Toast.
Toast. So we have Toast and Freya. Can we get the little Toast lower thirds, Freeman, please, to our producer? We need a little Toast to pop up. He'll do it. Trust me, it'll happen. Yeah. So and then I guess we should talk about the main subject for today, which is shapes and how you decided to start building that tool.
Yeah. Where to start? Well, I started. As I mentioned, I was doing a lot of educational content online, I guess. So not only during my streams, but I also started making these little like math animations on Twitter because I thought it was fun. Like I always liked the like people always value whenever you visualize something like any concept. Everyone like understands things so much better as soon as you can visualize something.
Right.
And so that's something that's always really important to me, like during my lectures and whatnot. And so I noticed that people saw a lot of value in that. Like if I make an animation that explains the cross product, that is going to be so much more effective than just writing a like math equation. If I just write a math equation, it's just like, oh, well, these are letters, like, cool.
Yeah.
Like the nice thing about writing math expressions is that you can sort of you understand the algebra if you study it, but you don't really get it. Like you don't, like, what's the purpose of this? Like, why do I need the cross product? What is the usefulness of this thing? And so I started visualizing math concepts. And because I'm like pathologically attached to using Unity for everything I do, I was like, okay, I want to grasp. Yes. I was like, I want to make these animations in Unity. So I started doing that. Like, okay, if I want to draw the relationship to a vector spinning in a unit circle, like what is the relationship between that vector and the sine and the cosine? So I just made a simple animation with that. So I had to like write shaders to draw a line from point A to point B with a certain color. I had to write a shader for drawing a circle with a certain thickness and with anti-aliasing, just to get like crisp, like 2D graphics that look nice, right?
You're right.
And so that's kind of how that started.
And that's without using Illustrator, without importing like a texture or a PNG or anything like that. Just generating it. Exactly.
Yeah, because like I mentioned this during our panel that like if you ask someone who's using Unity to be like, okay, can you draw a circle in Unity? Then it's like, I mean, I guess I can download a texture of a circle. I can draw it in Photoshop and save that to Unity and then draw it. And then if I zoom in, it's going to look like goopy and bilinearly filtered and ugly. It's like, oh, okay, that doesn't look too good. Maybe I can make a mesh of a circle that's like very highly detailed, I suppose. And then you can import that. But then you're like, oh, what if you want to change the thickness of that circle? Then it's like, oh shit, that actually gets a little bit complicated.
Jump back into Blender.
Yeah, jump back into Blender, or then eventually you're like, oh, well, it also doesn't have anti-aliasing, so I need like MSAA enabled in order for this to have anti-aliasing. And like just drawing a circle, it sounds so simple, is kind of hard in Unity, and in most game engines.
Yeah.
But if you go to something like HTML5 Canvas, it's literally just a command. It's like draw a circle at this position, with this radius, with this thickness, with this color.
That's right.
And it's so simple. And I think once I started making my math animations, I was like, I want this, but in Unity.
Right.
Like I want to be able to do these kinds of visualizations just directly in Unity.
So you weren't making those math animations in Unity at first. You were doing them in HTML.
No. I was making them in Unity.
Right from the beginning, you were making them in Unity?
From the beginning.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah, and so I started just doing that, and then I eventually got like more and more like well, because every shape has to have shaders associated with it. So it's kind of like an interesting math challenge to implement all of these shapes. And eventually it like grew to a point where I was like, well, this is actually turning out to be really useful.
Yeah.
This could be used in games as well. Like it's not limited to just math animations. And that's kind of where that started, where, you know, I started like designing it for a more general audience, a broader like use case for any game developers really. And so, yeah, that's kind of how that started.
Okay. So then I guess we've talked about like what it is, right? And maybe we can talk a little bit about how it works, like how you can use, like we don't have to jump into the editor yet, just like high level, like I download shapes, I open it up, like what am I actually doing to create these shapes?
There are effectively two different ways of using shapes. The first one is a more like classic Unity approach. You have a component, and then that component has a shape attached to it. So you attach a circle component, and then you can draw a circle. Or in this case, it's a disk. So you can draw a disk, and then you can change color, you can change the radius, you can set it so that it's a ring instead of a disk. You can also limit it angularly so that it becomes an arc. You can make it dashed if you want to, and all of that is in the inspector itself. There's also like a code-based API if you want to edit those things from code. And so you effectively just attach the components you want, and then it's going to render the shape that you want. So it effectively just works like any other mesh renderer.
And you can change them in real time. You can like have a pie graph that's changing over time, and you can link that to the animation and have that play out, right, in real time?
The entire library is heavily designed for real-time use.
Yes.
In fact, it's not a very good library if it's not real-time. Because you can't like bake shapes into a single mesh, that kind of stuff. But it is very good for dynamic content. If you're drawing 100 disks and all of them are changing to any random color, it's going to work great. And so it's designed with like GPU instancing as the method of batching and getting performance out of it.
Okay.
And so yeah, it's very very performant to like just freely edit all of these at any moment. So that component-based approach is the kind of the easy to use version of it, where you just place objects in your scene. And then we have the slightly more advanced version, or the more advanced side of shapes, which is much more similar to what I explained earlier, the HTML5 canvas approach. Or if you've used processing, or P5.js, like any of these like creative coding tools have these types of commands where you just draw from code. So it's effectively like in code, you write draw circle at this location, and then you're like, okay, I want to move my drawing matrix somewhere else and then rotate it, and then I want to draw a square there, and then I want to move my matrix again, draw something else over there. Like that is a wholly different approach from like placing objects in your scene. But it is very, very powerful because you don't have to deal with game objects or instances. It is fully immediate mode. In other words, that code is going to run for every frame you render. And so you don't have to deal with like, oh, I need a pool of rectangles in order to draw up to 10 rectangles performantly. No, none of that. It's just directly like draw a rectangle, and then if you want to draw more of them, you just make a for loop.
Right.
And so that workflow is one that is my personal favorite because I really like procedural drawing like that. And yeah, so that's kind of the other immediate mode API of shapes.
I see. I would love to throw up the B-roll of stuff made with shapes. That's stuff that I think you've made with shapes. And while that's up, we can talk about like, you're very clear about like, this is what shapes is for, and this is what shapes is not for, right? This is what you do with shapes, this is what you don't do with shapes. So while that B-roll is up, maybe you can like touch upon those things, you know? And I know you're very open. You're like, you know, you tend to say like, make what you want with shapes, you know? And I think that's great. But like maybe examples of things you've seen and requests you've gotten where you're like, no, that's not what shapes does. This is what shapes does. Then we'll throw that B-roll up.
Shapes is not related to SVG whatsoever. There's no SVG import, there's no SVG export. And the reason for that is because having support for those things would lead to a nightmare where I have to match like SVG specs, which is a lot. Their specs have been around for a very long time, and people are gonna like feature request every single corner of SVG, which would take all of my time. Like it would take so long to do that whole thing. And yeah, so it's not an SVG importer. I believe Unity has their own package for SVGs, and so I'm not gonna. So it feels pointless for me to make it, right? Yeah, and so it's specifically designed for real-time vector graphics defined in Unity, not some sort of like import asset process. And so yeah, so that's how, that's how it's designed.
Okay.
And so and I also have drawn some other lines. Like I consider shapes to be a purely rendering-based library. There's no there's no colliders to anything. It's just rendering. So if you want to have a collider on your things, you have to add that separately.
Yeah, so you can have like a prefab and overlay a collider on top and just set it up that way. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's purely rendering.
Yeah.
And then things like ray casting shapes gets complicated. I also don't have support for Unity's UI. And that's your fault. I mean, not you, but Unity.
I'll take the blame. I'll take it, you know?
I don't know, you take over for the team. No, it gets really complicated. I've written a blog post about this actually, about the problem with supporting Unity's UI. The long story short, Unity's UI combines meshes for performance reasons, and shapes relies on having that mesh data intact. And so putting shapes in UI is just very hard. It's possible if you use the world space canvas and you have the shapes separate from that. But otherwise they work just like mesh renderers, so they just have the same behavior as that. And so UI support like is just not something I have, but you can use it for UI. You just can't use it in Unity's UI system. So yeah. So a few limitations. Your mic is muted right now, I think.
Oh, my bad. Sorry. Yeah. So I think this would be a good time to actually jump in and unpack, like just unpack shapes, open it up as though, you're buying it for the first time and, you want to start making things. So we'll cut to Freya's screen. Cut to Freya's screen share.
Oh, I need to save a scene.
Okay, perfect.
If you just bought shapes, you don't have this scene. So I'm gonna open a different scene because actually it does include some samples. One of them sometimes crashes Unity, so I'm not gonna open that one. I'm selling my asset very well here.
It's just a demo scene. It's all good.
Yeah. Here we go. So this is
very
what
nice.
I call the shapes gallery, where you just have all of the shapes in shapes.
Okay.
So all of these use the component-based system. And so all of these are Unity components where you can kind of edit all of the properties here. So this is a polyline. So you can move these points around. You could change the thickness to whatever you like.
Yeah.
And there are different like mitering modes if you want like round corners, sharp corners, beveled corners. I don't know who uses bevel. It's just something that people seem to expect.
So you just have it there. I mean,
yeah.
you never know.
And then I also have like pixel-based scaling. So when you set the thickness of these objects, you can set them to either be in local space or meters, or you can set them to be pixel-based. So if you want to draw like 1 pixel thick lines or 3 pixel thick lines, you can do that too. And so that's of course independent of how close or how far away you are. And so it kind of scales it based on distance so that it retains that thickness. Another thing I also have is lines thinner than 1 pixel, which is not trivial to implement. But basically, as soon as you make lines that are thinner than 1 pixel, you run into issues where like aliasing becomes a problem. Then you get these like wandering ants.
Yes.
And so for 1 pixel thick lines, you actually have to start fading transparency instead. And so that's something that's built in. So just by setting the thickness, that kind of automatically happens.
And so is it actually making it thinner and adding transparency, or is it just adding transparency?
Effectively, it locks it at 1 pixel wide, and then it starts fading opacity instead.
That makes sense. Oh, that's
Yeah,
smart.
and that's dynamic as well. So
Yeah.
it's all dynamic based on screen size and distance and all of that stuff.
Okay.
And then you have dashed lines as well. So there's two components. So you can sort of imagine this being kind of a health bar or something. So you can change the, you can have color gradients. You can set the dash sizes and spacing, that kind of stuff. So a lot of controls when it comes to the features of the line and the polyline. And then the same kinds of features extend to the other shapes as well. So like you can have dashed rings as well. And you can see the different shapes here.
Oh, yeah.
You have arcs and pies, and all of these are like tweakable in the inspector. So yeah, you have your pie here. Maybe you want to change the color. So maybe you want a radial gradient, and you want the inner color to be red, and then you want to go to some other color on the outer.
And
outer
transparency, right? It's not just color. You can play with it.
Yeah, transparency
Yeah.
as well, depending on which
Yeah.
blend mode you're using. There's
Yeah.
also a setting for which blend mode you want to use. And these are kind of mimicking the Photoshop blend mode if you want to use like linear dodge, color dodge, linear burn, multiply, all of that kind of stuff.
I was playing with this and I just love playing with the color gradients. It's just so much fun. Yeah.
It's very satisfying. You
Yeah.
can kind of layer them to create all sorts of effects, right?
Yeah.
If I set it to additive, we
Oh,
get a very
amazing.
glowy vibe.
Kind of
to
glowy, yeah.
it. Yeah.
That's beautiful. It
It's
kind of
very
feels like
intense.
2D lighting at this point.
Looks like a broken shader with a magenta.
Yeah, that's right. You're giving a lot of people some PTSD, some Unity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shit, what did my Unity just do? Okay, I'm
can
closing
hold on.
Unity.
Okay. You can open back up real quick. We can play some shapes B-roll while you're opening it up.
I think it might be the streaming software thing that might be stealing
I
some
see.
RAM.
Yeah. So if you have any questions in the chat, please feel free to throw them up and we'll get those answered. Okay, nice.
Oh yeah,
Cool.
yeah. Feel free to ask questions.
Yeah, please. Ask
yeah.
questions throughout. I'll be asking them.
But yeah, so these are kind of the main shapes. Some of them are a little bit more special than others. Like for instance, there are polygons where you can have arbitrary points. Some of them, like you don't really have anti-aliasing because I can't make a specialized shader for polygons. Well, I can, but it's very complicated.
Yes.
And so there's some of the 3D primitives also don't have anti-aliasing. So that's kind of limited to specifically the very specific shapes of the 2D ones.
Yeah.
For 3D, anti-aliasing becomes significantly more complicated and kind of render pipeline specific. Whereas for the 2D shapes, the anti-aliasing it kind of works across the board. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there's just something so satisfying about like blending the colors and the gradients. It's so just the crispness of it all. It's just excellent, and being able to iterate so quickly, and like we were talking about, like having to upload a PNG, like a circle image, and then you decide, you know what, that's actually not what I want for my UI, and then you'll have to like create a new image and import it in. For iteration, this is fantastic. You just throw in a new component, you change the values, you change the color, and you get to just experiment and test and see what you actually want to achieve. It's kind of like a toy as well.
Yeah, it does allow you to experiment in like visually with what you want. And like I mentioned with Shader Forge, as soon as it's easy to iterate, you can start like accidentally finding things that you like. Like if it's that easy to tweak your dashes, like, oh, maybe I want my dashes to be like slanted, or maybe I want them to be rounded dashes. Like doing this manually, like swapping out this texture or like writing the shader for this takes a long time.
Right.
And so just having the ability to tweak all of these things is very valuable, because you can really like search your way to what you want to achieve. Yeah, and so
and we have
useful.
we have a few questions from the chat. One is like, can I have access to this project? I think they're asking about this demo scene. Is this scene
This is included.
Included? There you go. So Shubes, you can get this when you buy Shapes, which we'll drop a link to in the chat. Shapes on the asset store. Another great question atop of this, something I alluded to earlier. Would this perform well on mobile if you actually use it for fake 2D lighting?
Probably not, but that's not my fault. That's mostly just a factor of how like overdraw works. So if you want to use like additive like shapes for lighting, like if you want to use this as a light source, be careful not to stack too many of them because you're going to run into an optimization problem called overdraw, where you're drawing, you have to redraw every pixel for every layered mesh that covers that pixel. And so yes, it's possible, but be careful. So if you have like a million light sources, it's not gonna go too well. So yeah, that's just kind of a fact of how shaders and rendering works.
But I see you say a million, but what do you actually mean? Like, so like if somebody uses like 12 of these in a scene at once to imitate lighting,
if they're small, it's fine. If they're large, it's not fine. So it's all about how many pixels they cover on screen. And mobile generally has like very dense screens.
That's right.
So you have to be very careful about like covering the entire screen.
Yes.
But if they don't cover the entire screen, if you just use it for tiny sprites, then you can kind of go nuts. Like if they're just tiny, then you can use a lot of them.
Okay.
So I don't know if you have something like this one, and you just set it to let's see, something like this. Like this kind of looks like a fake light source, right?
Yeah.
So if it's kind of small, then you can just go for it. Just have however many you want, and as long as your mobile supports GPU instancing, this is going to be one draw call.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. And then another question: Flame Lizard Codes, great name. Are you procedurally changing the shader code? I wonder because a lot of if statements would hurt the performance, right?
Not really. This is a very deep topic, but I do have some static branches, like switching out shaders depending on which type it is. But in general, as long as you're branching on a very predictable value, if that value is like the same value across the entire shader, it's not going to cost much at all. And so I do have a lot of branches like that, but they're not they're not the expensive type of branch. Without going into too much detail, GPUs like predictability. And if you have a lot of diverging paths, then it's bad. But if it's all taking the same path during the same frame, then it's cheap. Yeah, so I don't have to do like static branching, and the advantage of that is that I can take advantage of GPU instancing to combine all of this, right?
Okay, and then I really like this question. It's not exactly about shapes, but it's just about I'll just say it. Eric Bronto says, I have the feeling that talented people are associated more with innate talent than with hours of effort. So I'm curious, Freya, outside of your job, how many hours do you spend studying and improving your math skills? Or are you just born with math?
No, it's definitely from experience.
Yes.
I think this is going to vary from person to person, but for me, I am very bad at doing things that I don't like doing. And the things I like doing just so happen to require a lot of math. and so it's kind of like, I'm excited about some sort of project, and then I pursue that. And then whatever I have to learn along the way, I kind of like power through those things. That's usually how I learn things. I rarely set out to be like, I want to learn this just for the sake of learning that thing. It's a bit of a non-answer when it comes to like the whole thing about like talent versus like hard work. I think it's a bit of a misleading like dichotomy. I think it always requires study and hard work. But I think what people sort of mistake talent for is that as in some sort of like thing you're born with, like it doesn't really work that way. But some people are just more excited about some topics than others. If you growing up, if you're super excited about illustration and you think it's really fun, you're going to have a huge advantage over someone who thinks it's really boring. And And so the person who thinks it's fun, they're going to pursue that. Like they're going to study it and pursue it and do it. But the person who doesn't enjoy drawing or learning how to draw, they're not going to be as good at drawing because they were just not as excited about it, right?
That's
So
true.
I think it more comes down to motivation, really.
Yes.
And like what that leads you to do. I think that's more the thing. And I'm sort of lucky in that I do find math fun after a while. Like once I got into it proper and started visualizing things, then it started becoming a visual concept in my head as well. And then it was more interesting.
So it was a means to an end at first, but then it became the thing you actually also started to enjoy.
Unfortunately, yeah. Like I've even started liking math notation now. I used to be like, no, code is so much better. And now I'm like, well, they have their uses.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
So,
I see.
yeah.
But I really like the way you put it because, it's like if you want to be good at something or you want to achieve something, you have to really want it, to get there. But you actually have to really, really want it. You can't just like lie to yourself and not be excited about it and just be like, hey, why is this not working out for me? There's something there, and just as you said, being very excited about it. It's
otherwise I don't know the answer to how do I learn something that I'm not excited about. I don't know the answer to that, and I've been.
Neither do I.
Yeah, and I mean I was bad at math in school.
Discipline.
I didn't find it very interesting. It was just kind of like, I don't know, why do I need derivatives? What's the point? But then now I'm like, oh, I have some use cases for derivatives, and now it's interesting.
I think sometimes it's like a matter of like discipline until you get to that point where it starts to click a bit more. You pass that first barrier and then you start to enjoy it. Then you can maybe get a bit more excited about it. So definitely there's like a mix of like really wanting it, being excited about it, but also that level of discipline is important there too. That's a really great question. Thank you, Eric.
Okay, so I was thinking I could just show a bit of an example of what the immediate mode API looks like by kind of live coding an example of that.
Okay, cool.
If you're curious to see.
Yes.
So I'm gonna open up a different scene. We're done with this one. I guess I can show just as an example. I do have immediate mode stuff included in shapes itself. And so let me just find the here's a simple example. So here's just gonna hit play. So this one is drawn using immediate mode. So all of this is defined through code, just like drawing these circles with these colors. It's a very, very simple script. I can show you what that looks like. And it has
so mesmerizing.
Tweak these if you want to set the number of disks. Maybe you just want a few of them. Maybe you want a lot of them. Maybe you want to be able to tweak the radius and make a weird hue strip, or just have tiny dots.
Yeah.
And this, like adding or removing disks, there's no like allocation cost to doing this because we're using immediate mode. That's kind of the power of immediate mode, is that you don't have to care about creating game objects and managing a pool of game objects. You can just write some code to you draw these and this many.
Okay.
And so I have a lot of comments here in case you want to read this, but the relevant part is basically this. So immediate mode and shapes works by it's one call per camera. I do have a helper function that calls this for every camera in your scene, including the scene view. And so what you basically do is you set up what's called a draw command, and within the draw command you just issue all of your draw calls. And as of the latest update, you don't need this one. And so in here, we can just kind of start defining how we want to draw these shapes. And so, for example, the first thing I do is that I set the drawing matrix to the matrix of the transform. And that basically just makes it so that we're drawing this in local space of this object. So if I move this around and rotate it, it's going to be drawn in local space.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what, like I mentioned before, this is not restricted to 2D. A lot of people think it is, but you can place this around a 3D object in your scene, right? Right. This could be like an in-game UI. It could be a prompt that's showing up on some object. So maybe we have a let's see, maybe we have a sphere somewhere. And this is a thing that might show up around it as a highlight, like a button prompt or something.
Right.
So you can do stuff like that.
So cool.
And
What?
yeah, so
One-
so basically in immediate mode, you issue a draw command where you just say draw disk at this position with this radius with this color. And that's all this script is doing. We're making a for loop and we're drawing disk count number of disks.
Yeah.
And then I just have some math to just get the position that it's drawing it at. Yeah, and so this is kind of the animation and the positioning part, and this is the drawing part.
Right.
So it's a very, very, very like simple example of how to do this kind of procedural drawing.
And someone can take this
Yeah.
script and attach it to their own project, and it'll just work immediately because you don't need you just need shapes, this code, and no other assets, right? So I wonder, are people writing these things and sharing them? Because I'd imagine you could have like a library of patterns and effects that people can just simply share with each other by like with a few kilobyte file, essentially.
I don't know if there is a library like that. The thing is that as an asset store creator, nobody tells you what they're making in your asset. They just kind of had the same problem with ShaderForge, where like
Interesting.
I felt like the whole world was using ShaderForge. Like everybody who was using Unity and wanted to make shaders were using ShaderForge at the time. But I almost never heard about it.
Right. So you couldn't
because nobody
confirm like
contacts me. Like, why would they
that.
reach out to me to show their stuff? You know.
Right.
And so it was only like until much later I like overheard someone and found out that like both Blizzard and Valve are using ShaderForge, and I'm like, oh,
That's
okay. Like, would have been nice to see any of that stuff, but so unfortunately, there's no place where people share these things, except like on and off on Twitter. People sometimes do, but yeah. So there's no library like that. Although one person shared it, I think on my Discord maybe. Someone. I think they were from China. They had a website with like a huge number of like shapes example things, all in Chinese.
Wow.
And yeah, so there's that, and I forget where that was.
Okay.
And so you can definitely do that, but there hasn't been like a community-driven effort to like set up a gallery like that, as far as I know.
I see. Somebody get on that. Someone in chat. Yeah.
All right, so this is just a very simple example. We can also open the one that usually or sometimes crashes. Hopefully I've fixed it since then. So here's another example that is a little bit trickier to do. If you're using game objects, then now for example, doing something like this where you're like procedurally generating a tree, it might be a little bit hard to see, where maybe you can set the line count of the tree, you can set the number of branches, and you can set a seed to like procedurally generate this whole branching structure.
Okay.
And this is just drawn using immediate mode, effectively just drawing a line, moving forward, and then rotating by some angular deviation, and then you're like producing this tree. And of course, you can do this in 3D as well. You can use shapes in 2D and 3D. There's not really there's no difference in 2D versus 3D in shapes.
Right.
Yeah, and so this is
just
kind of
putting it
the
at an
power
angle, I
of like code-driven shapes like this.
Right.
Yeah, and then a more advanced example would be this one, which is much more of a use case for a game. This one is also included in shapes. If you get shapes, this is going to be in there. If it actually goes to the scene view or the game view, there we go. Can I full screen this? Well, anyway, we don't have to. But so this is like an FPS HUD, some sort of FPS HUD that I kind of made up. So this is all drawn using immediate mode as well. So like all of these animations are set up using animation curves, and all of these shapes are drawn in immediate mode. Okay. And so just a simple system for that. Got this charge bar that has a bit of a glow to it. All of this text is scaling as well.
That's so nice.
And yeah, so this is just an example of how to use shapes. And again, I think the power of immediate mode is that you don't have to care about the number of instances. So like you don't have to deal with any pooling or anything. This is all just drawn like procedurally. And it's
I love
very
seeing
easy
the
to set
bullets
things
fly
up
out.
like you can see that the percentages scale on the left-hand side when it's like moving.
Yeah.
And Shapes does have a utility for drawing text mesh pro text in immediate mode as well. And so that's what
great.
this is. Yeah. And
That's
so
fantastic.
that's
We have a
an
good
example.
question from Dota Banani. Is it possible to add scripts to each disk, like make them buttons or make them avoid the mouse? I get it. Like when you're
No.
generating an immediate mode. Sorry, go ahead.
No, there's
No.
no way to
Yeah.
so Shapes does not include any interaction. Shapes
Yes.
is just a drawing library.
Yes.
But obviously there's a lot of built-in like Unity components. And so you can, of course, if we create an object, and we add a disk to it, let's make it a little bit darker. Then we can of course add colliders to this. So Unity's what's it called? Circle collider. So you can add a circle collider to this if you want. If you want the 2D collider, you can add a sphere collider. All of that stuff is just things you can add if you want to have
Yes.
collisions. I don't know
But
why
a
it's
little
not visible
harder.
right now though.
A
But
little harder when you're generating things in immediate mode to have the colliders follow the. Maybe you could align, like you can have the code move the colliders the way it moves the shapes, and then try to have them match. But that might be a little tricky.
oh yeah, in immediate mode you have to deal with you have to deal with instances then, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so if you're using the components, it's easier to set that up, but then you're kind of forced to use like instances of game objects.
Yes.
But yeah, it's definitely possible. We can just slap on Unity colliders. Although the default radius is going to be huge for technical reasons. And so you have to do colliders separately. There's no stuff for ray casting or anything like that. And that's just because that would be too much work on my end. Unfortunately, it's just kind of one of those like unfortunate side effects of being a sole creator of something. Like I have to draw a line somewhere.
Exactly, you do. I was just gonna say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
At some point.
And especially when it
requests
comes to
will flow
stuff
in.
like especially when it comes to things like if I configure this disk to like, okay, I want it to be a like a dashed ring, and I want the thickness to be based on pixels. So it should be like 14 or 15 pixels thick. And then maybe I also want it to be billboarded. So it's like billboarded to the camera. If I were to now implement interactivity and ray casting to select this object, I would have to basically re-implement everything I've done here that I did on the shader end. I would have to recreate that on the CPU side and make sure
Right.
that lines up, which is very non-trivial.
Yeah.
And so it's actually really complicated. And quite often what the user wants is a very simple interaction where it's like, oh, if I have a dashed ring, I can make the whole selection region just a disk or a sphere, and then it's going to work fine, right?
Exactly.
And so for me, it would be too much work, unfortunately,
No, that's
when you
fair.
can just slap on a sphere collider, and this is probably going to work fine, right?
Exactly. And if you're doing anything for UI, you just line things up and make sure that it's
Yeah,
all,
pretty
it's all in
much.
place.
Also,
Yeah.
your mic is a little bit low right now.
Oh, let me fix that.
Now it sounds better.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah.
I want to take some suggestions from the chat. So, like we said, we're going to do some live shaping.
yeah,
Feel free
yeah.
to throw some just
Some live
suggestions.
coding.
What do you want us to make? Maybe we should start with something to get the ideas flowing. Start just
Yeah. I
throwing
can
some-
start with a little example. There we go. I set up a 2D character I can move around.
Okay.
A very beautiful character.
Very nice. Very nice.
So let's see. Okay, I can move it around. Great.
Okay. Cool.
Okay, let's see. So I was thinking if you're making a 2D game, maybe you have a character from the side and you want to add some sort of aiming line, like
Yeah.
you maybe aim with your mouse and then you want to draw something from the character to the mouse that kind of indicates the aim direction.
Yes.
That's something that we could do something like that as a starting point.
Let's do it. That sounds great.
And so I do so where you would generally start is that you would add a new component. So what do we call this one? It's the aim thing. That's a
Trajectory.
great name.
Yeah,
for
aim
it.
thing is good. No, aim thing is better than what I was thinking. Yeah.
All right.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting one. Okay. We're getting some nice suggestions. We'll get to them.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave reading chat up to you.
Yeah, we'll get to them.
Okay, so in shapes, I have a helper class you can inherit from. So if you want to draw in immediate mode, you can inherit from immediate mode shape drawer. All that really does is that it helps you. It calls a function for you in every camera, so that it's easier to just add some code to draw something. So then you have to override a function called draw shapes, and this is going to be called for every camera that wants to render this. And so immediate mode shapes are always camera centric.
Yeah.
Okay. And then usually you set up a draw command. So using draw.command, then we pass the camera in there. So here we can start doing our drawing. Okay, so let's see. What do we need for this? We need the mouse position and the player position. So player position in this case is just going to be transform.position.
Yeah.
But the mouse position is going to be that's going to be the camera. So I guess we can just hack this. Or wait, I guess we do have this one. But so this camera is going to be both the scene view camera and the in-game camera. But if we want to do like raycasting for the cursor in-game, we're gonna have to make sure to only use the in-game camera.
Yeah.
So I guess we can just make a field for it, or we can use do camera.main. Okay, so let's see. Screen points to array input dot mouse position. This should work, right? I feel like I'm gonna screw this up somehow.
I'm loving this.
All right. Let's see. What do we got first? We got the normal. We got the points. So the normal is gonna be so negative z, and then we have a point, which can just be 0. All right. Are you getting any questions in chat while I'm?
Yeah, we have a bunch. So we
this?
have Odin Stream suggesting 2D weather effects, rain, and Sabioso says a speedometer. I guess people just want like lines coming down from the sky. We could do the 0.5 pixel length.
That would be possible, yeah.
Rain,
it's not
you know?
really designed to be a particle system, but I mean, you can certainly make that.
It's interesting.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things that people tend to make, but it's not designed for, and I kind of love it.
Yes.
When like someone like retrofits the whole thing into that.
Yeah.
Okay,
this is interesting. Eden Canada says, can you draw sprites/textures? Can you apply some shader-like treatment per pixel?
So you can't. Drawing textures, I do have a helper function for drawing textures, but it's not. It doesn't allow any custom shaders. It's just kind of a way to draw a texture in immediate mode as part of the shapes library, right? Yeah, so that's possible. Otherwise, shader-like things, I'm not entirely sure what that means. But yeah, there's no custom shaders and shapes because everything is GPU based. So it's kind of complicated to write your own shaders.
Right. I think that was the question. Can I throw a shader on a circle, for example, and have it dissolve or something
right.
like that?
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
I mean, you can if you know how to code shaders, but that gets really complicated because then you have to edit my shaders.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just setting up the cursor position in world space here.
No, great.
So, just a bunch of boilerplate. Okay. All right, cursor position. I guess we'll just do that. Okay, wow, we did it. We're now raycasting to the plane.
Harry Elisavakis asks, could you put custom render textures there?
In the into the draw texture function, yes. So draw.texture. It just takes any texture. So if you have a render texture, then yes, you can just pass that in. It also has like some extra properties for if you wanted to fit a rectangle with certain aspect ratio modes. If you can pass in custom UVs as well, if you want to like draw only a certain region of the texture. So yes, you can do that.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Harry. Thanks for joining us, Harry. Always great to have you.
All right, so there we go. Now we can draw a line from the player to the cursor position.
Perfect.
So generally, the immediate mode API is designed so that it has way too many overloads. And so if you want to draw a line with custom like settings, there are more overloads than Writer has the capacity to show. And so generally, you start with the positioning and you end with the colors, and then kind of starting with the essential and intrinsic properties of that thing. So the next thing here is thickness.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how thick we want this to be. Kind of depends on how big my player is. I forgot how big it is. So this just draws a line from the player to the cursor. This should be should work. I'm
excited. Excited to see this.
No reference exception. Probably the camera. I don't think I. Camera.main. Is camera main not set? Oh, did I create this like? It's not tagged as the main camera. Oh, I think it's
That's
not.
There we go. Oh wow! Come on.
So
First
this
try.
is just very basic. Like draw a line from some objects to another objects, and like very easy to set up, right? Well, the majority of the time was just finding the cursor position. Okay, and then we can kind of do like whatever we want with this, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you want this to be a cone, like maybe you want to draw. Maybe you have a weapon with bullet spread or something. And so maybe you want to show that spread like with these.
Yes.
And so we can do that too. So then maybe you want to set up a variable for that.
And maybe if you hold left click, it can slowly change hue from white to red, like you're charging something up or something like that.
That would be possible for sure.
And if you have
So
any more
let's see.
suggestions on how we can add to this and customize it, please throw it in the chat.
Challenge me.
Challenge.
Let's see. What range do we want to do the angle in? 0 to 90, 0 to 45.
Yeah. Limited angle. Shot, typical shotgun spread or something.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Let's see, that's the player to... Oh, geez. I always forget which order. Cursor minus player is the direction from the player to the cursor, I think.
RPS Toval says straight from the top of the dome. Freestyle. Very good, very good.
All right.
Sorry to
we're gonna
everybody
move the
who's
draw
too young
matrix.
to get that reference.
What?
So I'm sorry to everyone who's too young to get that reference.
Making me feel old.
Hey, I got it right away. We're in the same boat
Okay.
here.
Now we
Yeah.
should just draw the same thing. The only thing I changed here is that I moved the drawing matrix so that 0 is at the player position, and then I just draw like from that new perspective from this point onwards here. And so I think this should be exactly the same, which maybe it's not too exciting to see, but wow, it's the same thing. Isn't that cool? Okay, so what we wanted to do was to do some sort of, we wanted to do a spread, right? So that we
Yes.
could extend the whole thing.
Yes. And I also have a question from the chat from Mountain King 123. Can you morph shapes? So I guess can you go from a circle to a square in a gradual fashion? Can you?
No, you cannot do that. Every shape is very specialized, and
Okay.
so every shape is a separate shader, and so it's not possible to morph between them.
Right.
I could have made it in that way. Like if I made the whole thing like based on SDFs that all pass through the same like render pipeline thing, then it would be possible. But the problem is that then it becomes a very render pipeline specific implementation, and
I see.
it's kind of a nightmare to work with all the different render pipelines already as it is.
Right.
And so I didn't want to inflict that upon myself.
Yeah. But you can do things like if you have the polygon tool, because that is within the same shape, it's the poly lines, you can morph those around and change those,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, you can totally do that. Like if you have a polyline, like all of this, you can. I mean, if you have the code to morph them and move the points around manually, you can totally do that.
Yes. So in that sense, yes, you can, but you can't change it from a square component to a circle component.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can,
Okay,
you can
cool.
now like do that kind of blending.
There you go. Good question. Thank you.
Let's just call it A. We don't need to be descriptive here. What is delta? You know what? Let's just use vector 2s. We don't need 3D. I want my extension methods. Okay. Feel free to keep asking questions.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for them to come in. Also, just getting lost in the code, Freya. I think we're all just like, so fast. Harry asks, here's an idea. With enough points, could you use a polyline to draw a trail?
Yeah. A lot of people have been using shapes as kind of a replacement for trail rendering. That kind of gives you more control. It doesn't exactly... There's no built-in functionality to make it work as a trail renderer with the like automatic fading over time or the gradient coloring. But you can totally, if you code that fading in and of itself, you can totally use it as that. The polyline does have a billboarded mode, and so if we create a where's my polyline? There it is. And so if you make a polyline, set it to billboard, and especially if you use the round joins, you can see that this kind of looks 3D, right?
Yeah.
It gets a little bit weird at the extremes if you look at it edge on.
Right.
A bit of a limitation. Looks worse the thicker it is. But yeah, so this is still like very, very low poly. I don't know if the I don't know if wireframe is going to show up well on stream, but we can see the wireframe here, hopefully.
Okay, so it is.
So it's still using like 2D shapes.
Okay, got
for
it.
this.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. But then you can totally use it as a trail renderer. It also doesn't have to be closed. You can use an open polyline. Yeah.
So wait, is it is 3D or it's like imitating the appearance of 3D, or like what's happening with the polylines with the polys?
How do you
there?
define 3D?
Exactly. You know what? You should be asking the questions here.
It's using very few triangles in this case. It doesn't have volume like a normal like 3D cylinder would.
Yes.
It's kind of making a cylinder with a fill burning like this.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. And then Eden kind of asks, maybe this was already covered. What are the performance implications? And also, is it multi-platform?
It is multi-platform. What the performance is like depends entirely on what you use it for. It's kind of hard to answer that in a general way. You can totally use it for like, I mean, you can use it across the board. I have had some issues on some mobile platforms, and WebGL is a little bit sketchy, but I think we found out that I think initially it was on Unity's end, and then it turned out to be a bug in Chrome. And so as far as I know, the places where it doesn't work, it's not my fault.
Okay.
So it's always Unity's or Chrome's fault, apparently. But I have had a few reports of WebGL not being super stable.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I have also had reports of people having it working. I don't know how widespread this is because I don't know for how many it works. I only get the bug reports. So
that's true.
Presumably there are people where it works fine.
Absolutely.
Wait, why did that not work?
I'll let you figure that out before asking another question.
Yeah. Feel free to ask questions. I can
sure? Okay.
multitask. Okay. The spread angle is 0. That's why. Okay,
oh, there we go. Oh, that's awesome.
See, now we've spread this out a little bit.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Neat. Okay, so now we probably want to add, maybe draw an arc at the end so we have an actual cone shape. Might be nice.
Sure, let's do it.
Um,
So the question is, Dota Banani, can it be used with Vulkan and DirectX?
Insofar as Unity can, yes. It's not like platform specific. It just does shaders the way Unity always does. I haven't hard coded anything for any like specific render platform. Let's see. We have the angle start and the angle end. So we need a middle angle, so that's just going to be the angle of that. So angle mid plus, let's see, I had the half angle in radians. I'm going quickly now just to make progress faster, to not bore everyone with...
No, I think everyone in the chat, they're chatting with each other. We're watching.
Let's see. So for the arc, you need the origin, you need the thickness and the radius and the start angle and the end angle. Those are the things we need. So I think I have start angle and end angle, but I'm missing the radius. So that's going to be delta dot magnitude. And then the thickness, I guess we can just steal the same thickness as from the lines. And I think that should draw an arc. Might have some off by -1 issues, but... there we go. Have an arc. So now we just have this little cone thing if we wanted to make this an aim reticle for a game or something. That works right there. Relatively easy to like add a gradient to this as well.
Right.
So we can cache our angles.
I just want to say, Freya, I'm recruiting you to all my game jam teams. You know, we'll have the game done in the first 1 hour. We have a question. Can this tool be used to draw into UI?
Into Unity's UI system, kind of not really. But you can absolutely draw it in screen space if you want to. And so that's kind of the thing is that Unity's UI system doesn't support mesh renderers inside of the UI. And so the shapes components are mesh renderers. And so it doesn't really work. But you can totally like use it to make UI, just not as part of Unity's UI system. Kind of like we did with the FPS scene where you had this like ammo bar and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And how about adapting to different resolutions? If you were to use it with UI, and you wanted to adapt to different cases of like game resolutions, you're going from a 1920 to a widescreen, for example.
No built-in UI functionality. That's why I generally don't really call it a UI library. Because there's no like buttons or like aspect ratio correction. So you're kind of on your own when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Kind of code it yourself, like have it adapt to that. Yeah, exactly.
You can probably like do sort of a hybrid where you can use like Unity's UI just for layout, and then in the code for shapes, you kind of read the values from Unity's UI. I think you can do that. So yeah, there are like hybrid things you can do.
Right.
What is the next parameter here? I have too many overloads. I probably have to specify this one explicitly. Okay. Oh wait, this is an obsolete function. I'm using my old API. Shit. I'm sorry. Okay. That's why. I have a new API for defining gradients.
Okay.
The API has been like tricky to design because there's a lot of performance considerations when it comes to this code because it's run every frame. So I have to be careful about how I set that up. So just like having to set everything up to not do like allocate every frame and that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit tricky. Okay. So let's see, what color do we want for the inside of this pie? Because we could just do white and
Sure.
then fade to a fully transparent white.
Okay. So they kind of fade out. I like that.
Yeah. So it's a good start. So now we're
Yeah.
just setting up a radial gradient, and disk colors is just a struct so that we can use to pass into our anything related to arcs, pie, and circle or
Then
disk.
we're probably gonna have to make the outline match that gradient if we want it to all fully gradient out. But let's see what it looks like before we.
It's gonna fill it in this case, and
gonna
so
fill
the
it in this
outline is
case,
still
yeah.
gonna stay there.
Yes.
Also need to increase this angle.
And we've dropped Freya's YouTube channel and Freya's Patreon in the chat, by the way, if you want to support Freya.
There we go. Now we have a gradient here.
Oh, love it. Looks so good.
Someone was asking if it supports transparency. This is transparent, so yes,
There you
it
go.
does. So we can.
Oh, and that
also-
gradient is scaling with. So it's like local rather than worlds. It's scaling with the way you've set it up, right? With the code.
Yeah. We
Cool.
told this to match the radius of our aiming thing.
Gotcha.
And so we can, we can basically move it however
Beautiful.
far away from the player that we want.
Nice.
And so then the like kind of the power of immediate mode is that, like I mentioned before, that you can use many instances of things, and so without having to deal with the the whole concept of pooling objects.
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing that we can do here, for example, is that we can actually set up a for loop, and I'm just gonna use this code right here.
Yeah.
There we go. We're gonna do 8 of them. We're gonna get a little t value here, so that's gonna be pi divided by 7 in this case. No, actually 8. 8 is good. We're gonna go for 8. All right, and then we're gonna multiply the radius by this value. So we're iterating 8 times, and then we have a value that goes from 0 to 1, and then we multiply the radius of the arc by that 0 to 1 value.
Yeah.
And so what this is going to do is that it's basically going to scale the arc, but it's going to use the same angles. And now we're drawing 8 of these. And so I'm going to show you what happens now. Another thing to keep in mind is that the order you call these is the draw order of immediate mode.
Yeah.
So if you want something to show up behind or in front of something, that's a matter of sorting your draw calls.
Okay.
So in this case, I want to draw these on top of the pie. And so I'm also going to make the pie a little bit more faded, so it's not fully opaque in the beginning. There we go. So now we're drawing 8 arcs. And we go back, recompile, restart.
Oh,
There we go.
beautiful.
So now we have these little radial lines in the middle of
Yes.
this. And it's relatively trivial to add these. Like, as long as you know the math behind it, right? You can kind of do these things. And you can sort of see how this would extend to, I don't know, if you have a game where you want to make a radar, then this would be like a thing that can like spin.
Yes.
And like do little animations as it hits objects on your radar.
Absolutely.
And the kind of the really nice thing about immediate mode is that there are no game objects. Like, it doesn't add any garbage to your scene. It doesn't like clutter anything. It's very it's a very clean way to implement these things because it just kind of lives in the code, right?
Yeah, and I love like if you're making a first-person game, you can have crosshairs that animate or contextually, like you're gonna go pick up an item, it can like turn. Yeah, so all kinds of use cases here.
Yeah, and of course this is again I'm using it in a 2D use case now, but of course everything is in 3D. So if you want to like draw this in 3D, you can totally do that. So yeah.
Amazing. I wanted to ask, just in general, like for people who want to maybe pick this up on the asset store, or people who want to be publishers themselves. I was curious you've been doing this for a long time now, and I'm sure you've learned a lot of lessons along the way, and you've have been through lots of ups and downs. And I'm curious if you have any like advice for people. I guess it's 2 different questions. First, like advice for people who want to get started on the asset store, publishing their own assets, Like, something for them, and then I'll ask the same thing for people who are looking to buy assets and what to look out for when purchasing and putting new assets into their project. But we'll start with the publisher angle first.
So when it comes to publishing assets, I think by far the most important thing is kind of like what does your product do that your competitors don't do, right? I think that is one of the most important questions if you want to like actually like make money, like selling your things, which I presume you want, right? And so I think the first thing is what does my asset provide that's unique compared to my competitors?
Right.
So I think that would be the first step along the way. And then I think you also need to make sure that, or at least when it comes to the assets that I make, they are always a use case that I need it for.
Right.
I think sometimes you can get stuck in like, okay, I want to make assets, so I'm gonna stop and think about like, well, what assets are needed, and then you kind of have this whole mind map in front of you, trying to figure out like what's necessary. And I think that's kind of the wrong approach. I feel like the approach that works better is to kind of make games, and then once you bump into something that you need a tool for, then you kind of know that you have something valuable, right? But now we bumped into a use case, like you bumped into a use case where you're like, shit, I kind of need a shader editor here, or whatever it is you need, right? And so that's how I approach it. So that would be my recommendation of like, find a use case. Don't like, and like make sure that you run into a use case, because then you know that it's valuable for at least one person, and people who run into similar problems as you. So I think that would be my top requirements.
That's great.
Yeah, the other one I would say is the importance of kind of setting boundaries for what is for what your what the limits of your product is. Like I've done with Shapes. Shapes has nothing to do with colliders. It's all just vector graphics. Like none of this has colliders. It's all just a rendering library. And that is a boundary that I think is really important to set to make sure that you don't get overwhelmed. If I have support for raycasting and colliders, then I get this kind of like factorial growth of things I have to do for every new feature I add. An example of this is that these shapes, I can set them to be pixel based, so that lines have a thickness based on pixels instead of meters in Unity, right? This is something that is a multiplier. For every new shape I add, everyone is going to expect me to also have a way to set the if it should be in pixels or meters, right? So that's kind of a multiplier for everything you make. If I add collider support, every new shape that I add is also going to have colliders, right? Everyone's going to expect that. And so I think like you have to be careful about like what boxes you open, because you're going to get a lot of feature requests if you like slightly open it. And so draw clear boundaries for what your asset is supposed to do and what it doesn't do. I think that's really important.
Think about how things will scale so you're not overwhelming yourself.
Exactly, because you're going to get a lot of support requests if your asset does well, right?
Right. Okay, and then how about for people who are, they want to go purchase from the asset store? Black Friday sale is starting very soon after this stream in like 4 days, right? How do people pick the right assets? Some people will purchase assets because they want to use them for fun and hobby projects. But then I guess this question is more for people who are trying to build their game and want to make sure they have the right assets in their game. They want to deploy their games on multiple platforms. What should people watch out for?
Oh boy. I think I'm the completely wrong person to ask about this, because I'm like pathologically averse to using other people's code in my projects.
Oh, that's fair. Okay.
Because I usually enjoy the process of making everything myself.
Yes.
And so I don't really know. I guess the safe bet is to make sure that the things you buy are established and like you can read the reviews, make sure that it seems accurate and good for what you think it's going to be. Just double checking that kind of stuff. I'm not sure what kind of tips I would give. I'm I'm not
No,
sure.
no, that's fair. That's a great answer. And I would say, actually, something I've been seeing in the chat a lot, a question that's been coming up a lot is about what's coming up for Shapes. So I think that's a good place to wrap things up. So like,
Oh,
what? Yeah. So like, what are the
what is
latest
coming
updates you have worked on, and are there, do you have any plans for things you're going to be adding to it, or yeah? Because we talked about, keep like
So
limiting things, but yeah.
I've been kind of stuck in burnout for the past few months while trying to finish a video that I've been working on.
Yes.
Um,
Should
and
shout that video out as
so
well.
I've been very, very stuck in that.
Yeah.
Like I've been working on this video for about a year, and I really, really, really need to finish it soon. But yeah, so Shapes has kind of been on ice. I've mostly been doing like critical support updates.
Okay.
Yeah, but otherwise, I think the next on the horizon for Shapes would be it's a very popularly requested feature. Remember how I said that you want to be careful about what boxes you open and don't open?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I opened the box of having dashed shapes, right?
Right.
I was
That's
like,
right.
I,
You
I
did
want to
do
be able
that,
to add dashes to
which I
everything, right?
appreciate. It's a great,
it's
yeah, it's a
useful.
great feature. Yeah.
And so that's cool. You can add dashes to things. And the problem, though, is that dashed polylines is a hard problem to solve. And so I don't support dashes on the polyline, but because I opened that box, people have requested this a lot.
Right.
Yeah, and so it is, of course, useful to have dashed polylines. It's just a
Yeah.
very hard problem, and I want to solve it correctly, which is tricky. And so I have a big update for polylines specifically. I started working on it. I am like halfway through, and so eventually, hopefully, sometime next year, I think I'm going to do that big polyline update. But right now, I'm super focused on my video project.
Yeah.
Which is also made in Unity and is also using shapes.
Yes.
Which I guess I can show that if people want
I
to
was
see
gonna say,
some more.
can you show the little tease of that video? It's super cool. I got a chance to see this like this timeline tool you created for it, and it's fantastic. Yeah.
I made a video a while back about Bezier curves, so that's on my YouTube. And now I'm working on a sequel, which
Yeah.
is about splines.
Right. And there's your
and-
bespoke timeline for Shapes.
Yeah, this is my custom timeline tool.
Yeah.
Which is using shapes in Editor UI, which is not an officially supported feature, but it is possible, so I'm going to do it. So I'm using shapes here to kind of visualize various animations in Unity. And so here's an example of, let's force it to 16:9, because that's how it's designed. So this is an animation that is completely done in immediate mode shapes. And so obviously this took a little bit longer than my short example that I did now. But this whole thing is just drawing using shapes, drawing circles and drawing lines, drawing text, fading
cool.
them. Yeah, and it's just using the same tools that I just showed you for this entire video effectively. And so this is a video about splines. It's a concept that we all use a lot in games, but most people don't really know that much more about it, except they copy paste code from Bezier curves and Catmull-ROM into their project, and then they don't think about it.
Right.
Yeah, and so I wanted to talk about splines.
Right.
And so I went on a very long journey of researching splines for a few months, digging through math papers and a lot of stuff to go through. And then I started working on this video, and the video is going to be about an hour long. And this is all animated in Unity. And so all of this is also drawn using shapes. Yeah, none of this is not shapes, actually. I think the skybox is not shapes.
Okay.
Everything else is shapes.
Gotta change that.
Yeah.
And that answers the question that came up earlier, which is like, do you still practice and study? And the fact that we're digging through papers to build this video on splines just shows that you're always keeping up to date and improving.
Yeah, I think the like I mentioned, I did my Bezier video a while back, and kind of the natural extension from that is to like explore splines in general, which I think is a it's a really, really interesting topic once you dig really deep into it.
Yeah.
At least I think it is, especially
Yeah.
if you present it in an interesting way. And so I think what this video does is that I explore the purpose of splines and like what they're useful for, and kind of justifying why multiple different types of splines exist. So I think a lot of people kind of stop at Bezier splines and stop at Catmull-ROM and don't really consider like the Hermite spline or the B spline, or all of the different things that we have, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting that like when I look at the math universe discourse about splines, it looks very different from the game dev discourse about splines because they have entirely different focus.
Interesting. Okay.
And so when you talk about splines in math communities, a very central concept is something called continuity, which is basically how smoothly the separate segments connect. And so like half of this video is just about the two different types of continuity that are very often analyzed when it comes to splines. And so the video is about, first we're looking at Bezier splines, and then we jump into like thinking about continuity and what that means. And so that has to do with how smoothly they connect when it comes to all the different derivatives. And we're gonna look through lots of math and justifying why this is interesting.
Yeah.
And then finally, we're gonna look at geometric continuity. And so here I have this fancy animation.
Ooh.
Isn't this neat? These surfaces are not drawn using shapes. So this surface is a specially tailor-made thing specifically for this video.
For this part, for this segment, yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of visualizing some discontinuities and reflections. That's kind of the purpose of this. But yeah, anyway, so
And we're getting a sneak
this,
peek at this video, which is going to come out. Do you have a date for it, or
it's going to come out. I had a release date. I forget. Is it the 3rd? I've set a release date now because I'm polishing this forever, and
I see.
I've been like stuck polishing it for so long now, and so I should just set a date and actually finish it, even though it's not perfect. So,
and the date is?
I forget. I think it's December 3rd. I think that was what I decided.
Okay.
Wait,
like
what
a
date
little
is
early
it now?
Christmas gift for all of us.
Yeah, I think it's the 3rd.
Amazing.
That's my deadline right now.
And this is going to be like an hour-long video, right?
It's an hour-long video, yeah.
It's the only video on splines you're ever going to need. Everybody subscribe to Freya on YouTube. That's where you're going to post it, right? On your YouTube?
It's going to be on my YouTube, yeah. It's effectively sequel to my Bezier video. And
there
again,
you go.
all of this is animated in shapes.
Everything from beginning to end. And we're watching the video playing right now in real time in Unity in this timeline tool you've created for shapes. And fully animated. So this is more of a showcase of what you can do with shapes, essentially, as well. Yeah, all in immediate mode.
And this is just regular, just exists in the scene view, right?
All right, and there's your osculating circle.
You remembered.
Yeah, I remember. There you go. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, I could just watch
That's
this.
what I've been
I'm just
busy
gonna
with.
I'm just gonna watch this whole 1 hour video on mute just because it's so satisfying to watch. Like I'm gonna turn it into like a screensaver. It's just gonna be playing everywhere. It's just so satisfying to watch these animations, and I think everybody in the chat, everyone in chat's agreeing with that. So I want to drop a link to Shapes in the chat. That's gonna go on the chat right now. So check out Shapes, support Freya on YouTube, and